Welcome back to the WCC FBLA Entrepreneur Story. I'm your host, Abe Mahendru, and today joining us we have is the co-founder and owner of Redwood Barn Nursery, located in Davis, Don Shor. So, hello, Mr. Shor. For some of the audience members who are curious as to knowing who you are, can you give them some background information about yourself?
Sure. I went to UC Davis and plant science major, graduated in 1980, and happened to jump into a partnership very quickly to open the Redwood Barn Nursery, which at that time, when we built it, was on the edge of town. It's been swallowed up by development in Davis, but we're on Fifth Street down near Pole Line in 1981. So we opened over 40 years ago. Regular garden center, has a background in plant science, bachelor's in plant science from UC Davis. I grew up in San Diego, so this is the most extreme climate I've ever lived in. It's a very nice climate down there, but I really like this area and settled in here.
40 years, that's a very long time. So, knowing that you graduated, like you said, in UC Davis from 1980 with a plant science degree, and then the year after you started the business, which was only like a year time frame, this makes me beg the question, did you plan this business idea during college, or was this something that came up after graduating?
It came up as an opportunity sooner than I expected. I did plan and hope to have both a farm and a nursery in my lifetime, and I now have both a farm and a nursery and got them both rather earlier than most people would at that age. Opportunity came up. A gentleman who was older, 25 years older, wanted to invest in a plant-related business. He knew the superintendent of the Arboretum. He introduced us, and we got together in a partnership and started the business that way. So I knew I wanted to do it, but I didn't expect it to become available that quickly. It was a lot of scrambling, a lot of work to find a place, put it together. We built the building, from ground up, and started the nursery. All the two of us with our help from families and friends. So it was something I had planned to do. People who knew me as a teenager were a little surprised that I already knew what I wanted to do, where I wanted to go to college, and what for. And I was just sort of amazed to be able to do it that quickly. But yes, I did have that plan even as I was an undergraduate.
Yeah. Definitely developing a business at that age, it requires a lot of ambition and
Yeah.
it's not an easy task at all.
A lot of details involved in building a building and starting a business, I can tell you that, yes.
Yeah, definitely. So, saying that there was some collaboration involved with like a partner, can you more so give us more specifics as to how was that collaboration?
Yeah, he was an older gentleman, 25 years older than me. He had always wanted to do this. It was sort of the end of his career. He had been a business owner and he'd worked overseas in a lot of places, and he always wanted to have a plant business, but was not a plant expert.
Oh,
He was a business guy. And so that worked actually quite well. He knew his limitations, I knew mine. And we started as a partnership, and he worked in it for 10 years and then retired from that. Actually, unfortunately, died about 10 years later. But he was an older gentleman who wanted to do this kind of thing, but wanted someone with the plant expertise. So in our conversations, I introduced myself, we sat, we talked for a while, we brainstormed. We realized we could make a go of it, each of us taking a gamble. He was gambling money he had saved and put together for this purpose, and I was just jumping right into something where typically you would go into a job, a career, you might do this 20 years down the road. I was like, no, I'm going to take no income for a couple of years. Had a spouse with a job, that's important, and was able to live on that and get it going that way. So it was an opportunity we both jumped at with. It's a big gamble when you do that. You never know. Most businesses, as they will tell you, fail within the first couple of years, usually due to undercapitalization. But we made a go of it, and we were aware of the limitations we each had and of the risks going into it.
yeah, definitely the plant sciences and business aspect that makes a really good combination.
Yeah, the businesses that I've known that have had trouble are the ones where they're both experts on the subject. I knew two people who went into the wine business, for example, together as partners. Neither one of them was a business expert, so they're really good at the wine end of things. They only lasted 4 or 5 years because you really need someone in there who's saying, you're ordering too much, or how are we going to display this, or how are we going to advertise it and promote it? The business aspects that you typically aren't really thinking of when you're the plant person or the wine person.
Yeah, it's definitely very important to take into account the business aspect.
Yeah.
And going more so into the competitions you have locally, such as the Growing Grooves Plant Shop in Davis and the Davis Ace Hardware, how does your business differentiate from them?
Growing Groves is a new houseplant shop, and we've strongly encouraged them. We think they're great. They're a couple of young guys who took the same risk we took. I feel a lot of sympathy for what they're doing. We have houseplants, they have houseplants. They focus on quality, unusual selection, going out and consulting on things. We focus on having a very good selection, spending a lot of time with the customer in shop. We're only competing on about 10% of our inventory with them.
Oh, okay.
Davis Ace, like most Ace hardware stores and most hardware chains, has a very basic selection of plant materials. They don't generally have expertise on site. So our main differentiation from the start was expertise.
Okay.
We'll be there to answer questions, help you with plant problems. We're not trying to compete on price or anything like that. We're competing by having the best plants around, finding small growers who have interesting stuff, keeping on top of the trends, which I can tell you after 40 years, things come and go in this industry. House plants are like crazy for the last 5 years. They're leveling off. I'm watching that. They're 10% of my business or so, so I need to be aware of that. So we try to differentiate on quality, selection, and really expertise, I think, is our main thing. Like getting people to understand that we're the garden experts locally that you can come to, even when you have questions that aren't necessarily going to result in a sale. I'll talk people out of pesticides more often than sell them pesticides. I'd rather do that and have them get a good feeling as they walk out and come back in and buy a plant next time.
So in terms of comparing to your other competitor, the Ace Hardware,
Sure.
so how does your business differ from theirs?
They have the basics. They sell a lot of the hard goods, tools, pesticides, fertilizers, things like that, which are maybe 20% of our business total.
Oh.
We sell more plants by far. That's our big category. When we hit the recession, probably too young to remember, but the one 2009, the big recession, we realized everything was dropping rapidly. Most retailers that year dropped 35% in sales in about an 18 to 24 month period. You begin to realize what your core product line is. For us, it was plants. Trees, shrubs, flowers, vegetables, fruit trees, things like that. The things that people want that are good quality plants. The other stuff, garden gift stuff, statuary, pottery, that's all cool. That's great if you can have it. But we realized what our core mission was, which was to sell plants and help people grow them well. So that's how we differentiate from the hardware chains, which tend to be more the hardware end of things. Irrigation supplies, bag goods, pottery, that kind of thing. They have more of that than we do by far. They have more space than we do by far. They have plants, but it's pretty generic. So I feel very comfortable with Ace, and I send people to them all the time, just as I do to the Growing Groves plant shop. I have a very collaborative relationship with our competitors because I feel that we each have our own place in the marketplace. One of the most important things I learned when we opened was that we're competing for people's use of their leisure time. We're competing with the ski industry, with in the summer with picnics and outdoor activities. We're not really competing with the guy down the street. We're competing with how you choose to spend your Saturday morning. So we began to realize that we're all kind of in this together, and just encouraging gardening in general. If they're encouraging houseplants and then we don't have what someone wants, we'll send them over to them. If they need more bag goods than we have, we'll send them over to Ace, and we do it very happily because we know they do the same thing back. So it's a reciprocal relationship, even though we're in competition with each other.
Yeah, this definitely to take something into consideration, collaboration.
Yeah.
Because most companies, when they do compete, they don't really help each other. They're more so like, I don't like that other company. I don't like what they're doing. I'm gonna be better than them. But it's nice to see that you're actually collaborating with them and improving each other. Like
the first nursery I worked in when I was 17, I happened to mention a nursery down the street. This is in Pacific Beach, if you know Southern California at all. And when the manager overheard me, he said, if you ever do that in the presence of the owner, he will fire you on the spot, because he couldn't stand the competition. And I took away from that, that's not a good way to go. I knew those people were perfectly nice folks doing their best. And so, there's no reason to feel like every penny that's going out to gardening has to come into my shop on this particular visit. But they do remember that when they had a pest problem, they went and talked to Don. He gave them an answer, made them feel more comfortable about it. So the next time they think about plants, hopefully they'll think of us first. That's really what we're after.
So in terms of the more so bigger companies that are now in the market, such as like Home Depot and Costco, how does your company differ from those bigger companies?
Well, that's actually pretty easy because they're buying nationally. Well, the biggest purveyor of plant materials in the United States is Walmart. I would suggest that you go into a Walmart garden center sometime. I don't wish to disparage them, but they're terrible. The reason being they have to buy regionally. They have to have huge suppliers that can supply them with enough material. They won't have the interesting selection we have. They'll have some succulents. They won't have 10 tables of them like we do. They will have some interesting perennials, but they won't have a whole selection of native perennials or native shrubs like that. They can't buy that way. They can't actually stock themselves that way. And an important point about those stores is they're guaranteed sale. So everything that's in there from a wholesaler, they only pay for it when it goes through the register. Pay at scan, it's called. So it's basically on consignment. So they don't really care about the upkeep of the plants, and that's a frustrating thing to me as someone who cares about plant quality, to walk in there and see plants that are in bad shape. So basically quality is our biggest issue, our biggest competitive strategy against them, but also plant knowledge and plant selection.
Okay. So from your expertise and experience in plant science, in addition to the many articles you've have written on specific subjects such as pest and disease control, pruning, and planting recommendations, I'd like to ask too, whom did you write these articles to?
Oh, I've written for the Davis Enterprise for 30 years, and I'm primarily writing for that market, the people who are reading the garden columns. Avid gardeners would be my primary focus when I'm writing it, so I do get a little more technical than you might if you're writing for a much broader audience, but I found that people actually like it when I do that. So the public is my primary, obviously the primary people I'm writing for. It's essentially an advertising strategy, but I enjoy doing it, and then I enjoy giving people information. I would say that's the main audience is active gardeners, and sometimes I'm aiming at novice gardeners, people who are just getting started and want their information distilled a little more carefully, I guess I could say. It's for the public, and I've been writing for them for many years. They're all at redwoodbarn.com on my business website. They're all backed up there, but they're primarily in the Davis Enterprise. Same reason I do the radio show, the Davis Garden Show, talking to the existing gardeners in the Davis area, all over the world actually, thanks to podcasts, but primarily the Davis area, to give them timely information, pest control issues, discuss things that are current topics, and try to focus on active gardeners or beginning gardeners that are out there in the public. But the public is my main audience. I have given seminars to pest control applicators, master gardeners, people like that who are professionals or like master gardeners, active volunteers in the field. So I do talk to them as well, and I give a rather different presentation when I do that because I feel like they're at a different technical level, and I can be a little more jargon when I'm giving talks of that type.
Okay. So knowing that we're also running a show, and you also run a show yourself,
Yep.
like the Davis Plant,
Davis Garden Show. Yeah.
Davis Garden Show. Can you give us a more so insight into what you guys talk about on the podcast?
Fortunately, people send us questions all the time. So we answer gardeners' questions from all over the world. The interesting thing about that podcast is we did it starting in 2005. And that was when podcasts were very, very new. And so we immediately got listeners. We had someone in Yukon Territory. We had someone in Queensland, Australia, sending us notes asking us gardening questions. Quickly had to do some research about what their gardening climate was like, but we were happy to do that. So primarily it started out answering questions that came in locally, but also from international listeners. And so we broadened out to very general, we call it Davis Garden Show and beyond because we do have many listeners outside of the area. So we talk about it locally, but we try to broaden it out so even someone listening in Connecticut can get some information out of what we're talking about.
Yeah.
We focus heavily on what's seasonal, what's timely, what's now. But in the show I just recorded before I came up here, we were talking about a question that came in about how to choose fruit trees for a school gardening project. Now, it's a very specific thing with a whole lot of parameters. We went on for about 20 minutes on that. If I were planting trees here on this campus, we'd have to have a conversation about the factors involved in that. So that was the topic this time. It's all over the place in terms of what we actually talk about. We generally try to be very pragmatic, practical, what to do now. And if there's one takeaway from it, I'd like people to be calmer and mellower and less concerned as they garden. That's really one of my messages is it shouldn't be a stressful thing. Don't worry so much about a pest when it shows up. Just learn about its life cycle. So that's really right there is a big focus of what I do when I'm talking about the what is this pest, what is this problem on my plant question, which is probably half of what we deal with. Just understand it, know the life cycle, adopt an an integrated pest management approach to it so that you aren't running out there and getting concerned and rushing down to buy a pesticide. That's just one example how I try and make it so the gardening is easier, more fun, not stressful.
Yeah. So something that I actually find very unique about your podcast is people can actually call it up and ask live questions.
They have done that in the past. We haven't been able to do that with the studio closed for off and on over the last 2 to 3 years. So most of the questions are coming in by email now. But yes, it was a call-in show, and that was great because there's nothing quite as spontaneous as a call-in show where you don't actually have a control over the phone, 5-second delay like you have in most radio. So you have to listen carefully. You have to try to answer the question. And then with those, if you ever listen to the podcast, they're often very hyper-local. So I would always try to expand the concept out more broadly, regional, or even to listeners elsewhere in the country that they'd be able to get something out of my answer.
So going back to your overall business, why did you start up this business and how did you go about starting it up?
I mentioned it was a partnership. I had always wanted to start a nursery somehow. And just very broadly speaking, people can jump into that like we did, build it from the ground up. More commonly, most of the nurseries I know that started as small scale operations were a hobby that turned into a business. I'll give you an example. When I started the business, my mother was about to turn 50 and she was interested in succulents. And I gave her the biggest book on succulents at the time, Lexicon of Succulent Plants by Jacobson. Suddenly she was propagating succulents. Next thing I knew, she was selling them to nurseries in the San Diego area. Next thing I knew, she was making $4,000 to $5,000 a year just propagating, growing, and selling succulents around San Diego. So that's a very common way someone gets into the nursery business. Something they're interested in, a particular group of plants, and then they start selling that locally, or nowadays, of course, selling them online. And that's an easy way to get into the nursery business. You actually can do that without a facility, without an inspected site and so forth. You don't have the complications we had. We wanted to sell to the public. We wanted to be in a visible location. We wanted to sell everything. I carry all kinds of things: fruit trees, shade trees, flowers, roses, you name it, house plants. We have them all in a very compact location. If you've ever seen our nursery, it's only 8,000 square feet. So we had to do a lot of planning to make a small area turn over that much stuff. But you don't have to jump into the nursery business as a full-on garden center. That would be hard to do nowadays. It's very hard to find land. We actually purchased the lot that we're on. I don't know very many people who could do that now, 40 plus years later, but it was possible to do that. But if you're going to do that, there's a lot of other things that come into the decision-making process, like traffic circulation, all the permits and regulations. But just starting a nursery is not that hard to do for even someone 20, 25 years old to just start accumulating plants they're interested in, cactus, succulents, ferns, whatever, and start marketing them. And it's actually easier now than it was 30, 40 years ago because you have that whole online market that you can jump into.
Okay. I have a question more so about the structure of your actual business, the physical structure. So I've seen a picture that is actually red. So when you started the business, was the barn actually red before, or did you paint it?
Actually, we couldn't paint it red at the time. Once upon a time, Davis had a design review process, and you would submit your plans, and they would go to the Planning Commission, and the Planning Commission would have the design review committee look at them. And we were going to paint it red, and they said, no, that's too bright, too gaudy. So we said, okay, let's put natural finish redwood siding on there. So if you go back to old pictures on Davis Wiki, there's still a picture of the building 20 years ago before we painted it, when it had natural siding. We looked at it finally and said, okay, they can't control us now. We can paint it red. We can do whatever we want. We painted it fire engine red, so you can't miss it as you go down 5th Street. That was, the plan was, to answer your question, yes, we were going to paint it red, but they wouldn't let us.
Yeah.
Now it is.
Yeah. So in terms of
And that building, just for the record, is a kit. You can buy a rural barn kit.
Oh, yeah.
We purchased a kit from a company. They brought it. The sales rep was also a licensed contractor. He helped out my family and my friends, my partner's family and friends. We had a barn raising on 5th Street, and it was up and being framed in the first day, and we built that barn from scratch from a kit.
Oh, okay. That's very interesting.
Yeah.
So going back to, knowing that when people have businesses, they have their ups and downs, and knowing how you brought up your business, I would like to ask you, what was the most challenging time you had as a business owner, and how did you overcome it?
Well, I addressed initially that 35% drop in business during the recession. Capital Nursery was a chain in Sacramento which was having trouble at the start of that. That was the end of it. After 2 years in that, they finally went out of business because 35% drop in revenues is very challenging to deal with. I would say the other challenges we deal with have been weather related. This year, for example, we had 13 atmospheric rivers that hit California, flooded all over California. Our business for the first quarter of this year was down 35% compared to the previous year because of all that rainfall. You adapt to that. You manage your inventory carefully. You keep your staffing levels as low as you reasonably can without cutting into people's own take-home pay. To me, that's very important, that your employees actually can count on their income. But I would say between the economic recessions I've been through and the droughts we've been through and the flooding, of those three, droughts are the biggest long-term threat to the nursery industry, and they're a big challenge for nurseries. When we've had 2 major droughts in the last decade that were more profound than anything anyone had ever seen before, it changes how people landscape, it changes how they garden, and you may be subject to state regulated reductions in water usage, such as the 30% reduction that was mandated this last year during the drought. That's a big difference, and that makes a big difference in whether people plant a vegetable garden, whether they plant fruit trees. So those are the long-term concerns any nursery in California should have, because everywhere has different water supplies with different levels of sustainability, and it'll affect your long-term growth or even existence in an area if there's going to be a water shortage. I would say that's the biggest long-term challenge. Short-term, of course, economic ups and downs, and of course things like flooding where you have just rain week after week. That's no fun, but it is something that you know will eventually end, so you know you'll come out of that.
Yeah.
Harder to plan for a 5-year drought. It's really hard to plan for 2 5-year droughts in a 12-year period, which is what we just went through.
Okay. So you planned for a 5-year drought. How did you, so what does your plan consist of?
When that is beginning to happen, I do shift the emphasis of my articles and conversations on the radio to more drought-tolerant plants, more native plants, helping people figure out how to remove their lawns and re-landscape. We can still sell plants. It's going to be different than what it was before. Doing a lot of outreach, a lot of public speaking at that point to get people to not just stop watering their lawn and have it die, but replace it with something cool and interesting. In other words, help people get through that themselves, because a lot of people who don't have any technical knowledge or horticultural skill or advice just give up. They just stop watering and everything dies. So we want yards to look good. We want street trees to be healthy. That's actually really important to me now in this stage of my career. Davis is a big category of my activity these days, helping people take care of the trees they have, helping them plant more trees and so on. It's a lot of outreach and a lot of public education.
Yeah. Knowing that many times when entrepreneurs want to start out a business, one of the biggest hurdles they face in starting a business is the financial aspect, or more specifically, that initial investment required for starting up a business. Therefore, what were your experiences regarding the startup of your business financially?
We fully understood that we probably wouldn't pay ourselves for the first 1 to 2 years. So that's something you need to be aware of. You need to have enough money in savings, or in both of our cases, a working spouse is actually really important, someone that can have money coming in reliably from a job that will keep you both going. Be willing to live on less income for a while, or basically no income for a while. And what they always talk about, business failed because of lack of capitalization, but really what it is the owners get tired of living on less money than they could live on working for someone else. So in our case, for example, I could have gone to work for a bigger nursery and made more money, or made money for that first couple of years, but my long-term goal was to own a nursery, so I stuck with it, and gradually you start to pay yourself more and more. Undercapitalization means you personally take home less money. Even when some of your employees may not know in the first couple of years you're paying them more than you're paying yourself. You're doing that because you want the business to work, you want the business to be successful. So you have to be prepared for periods of low income initially, and also down the road, it may happen again. It could happen that there's a significant economic downturn. Well, you'll lay off staff, but it's really important to keep good staff, and they need to know that their income is reliable, so you'll cut your own pay. That's just what ends up happening, unfortunately.
Yeah, so having low income is just something to be expected
At times, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and there's times when it's great.
Yeah.
The business is very seasonal. I mean, this is the thing. We do 40-50% of our business March, April, May.
Yeah.
We know that. Once you know that, you just plan for that. You know that it's going to be slow in August, it's going to be slow in January, and so on. So it is good to have a reserve of cash or a second source of income. And almost every entrepreneur will tell you that. If you're starting a small business, having someone else in the family that can at least buy the groceries for a little while can be rather important.
Yeah. So knowing that you've been in the business for over 40 years now, which is a very long time, what is the future of your business? So more specifically, do you plan on retiring, selling the business?
Well, I joke about that because I am in my 60s, and people ask me, "Are you going to retire?" And I say, I'm doing what people think they want to do when they retire. They want to open a little shop or have a farm. Well, I have a little shop and I have a farm. So I enjoy what I do very, very much. And so I suspect I'll never technically retire. Most people in my situation just maybe go to the office a few fewer days a week every now and then, or hand it off to employees. Family transition of businesses is a huge challenge no matter what business you're in. You usually don't have kids that are interested, so you figure, unless you're really lucky, so you figure out some way to hand it off to another generation. Or you just back out and you let your staff, if they're good, take care of things for you.
I mean, considering you're 40 years into the business, do you consider you're turning your business into a franchise and perhaps expanding?
That's actually pretty funny. When the barn arrived as a kit, my friend who was a carpenter said, "Hey, we should build these up and down the freeway." have a chain of Redwood Barn Nurseries. No, I haven't considered that. I've actually had opportunities over the years to start a second business or a third business. We ran a landscaping business for 20 years out of the nursery. It's very stressful to run more than one business. I know a guy in Davis who had a business in Woodland as well, and he found himself running back and forth all the time. So basically, my answer to that is no, I'm comfortable with what I have. However, many people going into this business, Green Acres is a good example of a regional chain in Sacramento, they have kept expanding and kept adding more stores. That's a very common pattern. To me, that would be very stressful.
Yeah, definitely expanding is not an easy experience.
Yeah.
So compared to the 1980s when you started your business, how is the process of starting a business different now?
It would be harder now. There's fewer places to do it, and the cost of land and the cost of a lease would be much higher. And so if you were doing it now, you would probably do it on a lease, not a purchase, because it'd be hard to find a place, reasonable location to buy. So you'd be leasing. So you would have to have a 3 to 5 year financial plan that was clear. And you'd have to have a sort of a what is it, cut bait or fish is the phrase I'm looking for. If you're not making enough money in 3 years, if you're not paying your lease, if you're not covering it, you should probably back out and do something else. Whereas we had, since the property was purchased, we didn't have a lease that was staring us in the face every month. We actually had, obviously other monthly costs, but not that. So you'd better have a plan that's probably shorter duration than what I had in mind when we first started. You're going to go up, you're going to go belly up faster nowadays if you do. And I know that's a sort of a cynical way to look at it, but you better plan very well for all of your expenses. Talk to someone who really knows what the variable expenses are. Those are things that we didn't know real well then, but we were able to accommodate too. Like cost of insurance then was reasonable. It's not reasonable anymore, and so on. So there's bigger factors now in terms of just getting started in the marketplace. Again, I would go back to the idea of starting a business sort of organically at home, having it grow to something, then jumping up to where you have a location that you're going to move to. That might be a safer way to go about it nowadays. What we did even then was unusual. I think now it would be darn near impossible for a couple of random guys to go find a lot and build a nursery on it. But there would be ways to do it. The key would be probably finding a place outside of town in a commercial district. Then you have the challenge of getting people to your nursery. We're right on a busy street in Davis, and that makes a big difference.
Yeah, definitely. So lastly, for many young adults looking out there to start their own business, what would be one advice you would give them to be a successful entrepreneur or business owner?
Two things. One, you should be flexible. Most of the things I thought would sell when we first stocked our inventory weren't necessarily things that did sell, but they were great suggestions from the public and from other people. So be flexible about what your product line is and be prepared to jump into new product lines. Watch the industry and watch what the trends are. That would be the first thing. Just being flexible and being prepared for the ups and downs. It's challenging to deal with the public all the time. You probably should take a break from that every now and then for your own sanity, and don't hesitate to ask business experts for advice. I don't think we would have worked out as well as we did if I hadn't had a business partner with me as a plant guy. Two plant guys wouldn't have done it. It really was a very good combination in terms of having his little more, I won't say cynical, but his more realistic approach. At one point, October, a second year we were open, he walked out to me and said, you've spent more money in October than you did in May. Oh, no, I didn't know that. Okay. I was just buying away like crazy because everyone was buying stuff. He's the one that was doing the books and saying, all right, we're not meeting our budget here. You need to tamp it down a little bit. So accepting advice from business people is a very good plan. Sometimes it's outside consultants, sometimes it's just someone who knows your business well and is willing to talk to you.
Yeah, definitely. So this is going to be the end of our entrepreneur story, and I would like to sign off by thanking Mr. Don Shor for being our guest speaker for today. I appreciated having you on our show today and taking your time to be present on our show. So thank you.
Thank you. Great to be here.